This moment does not require short-term thinking. It does not require having the same old stale debates. Our focus has to be on the basic economic issues that matter most to you, the people we represent.
I love hearing the president sound like that. But how realistic is it? Because, see, the economic issue that matters most to Americans right now is, of course, you know this, jobs. And the jobs that are coming back aren't quite cutting it. According to a report from the National Employment Law Project from 2008 to 2010, higher wage jobs made up 19% of recession job losses and 20% of recovery growth. Mid-wage jobs were 60% of recession job losses, but only 22% of recovery growth. And here's the one, low-wage jobs made up 21% of recession losses, 58% of recovery growth. Tomorrow could be a critical day in the push for better pay for low-wage workers. Thousands of fast food workers in 7 U.S. cities planning to walk off of their jobs in an escalation of ongoing strikes seen throughout the fast food industry since last November. So, Congresswoman, you know, we're adding jobs. The jobs we're adding are often low-wage jobs that don't have ladders to something else. How do we make these jobs into jobs that can support families?
Let me say first that the Progressive Caucus tomorrow will be with the McDonald's workers here in New York as part of our Raise Up America tour. If the Republicans in Congress would pass some of the bills that the president put forward, such as investment in infrastructure, such as public sector jobs, stop all these budget cuts, then we would be on the right track. There are many, many jobs of the future if we could get the right initial investment. These low-wage jobs, I have to tell you, making $6 and $7 an hour, people have to rely on SNAP, on food stamp benefits, on Medicaid. It's costing our economy much more at the other end. And so we need to invest in good paying jobs. I support, first of all, an increase in the minimum wage, but also, more importantly, we've got to get to a living wage. In my own state, that's $20-some an hour. People deserve this if they're going to live the American dream. Right now, employers are hiring people. They're hiring people part-time, so they don't have to pay benefits. They're hiring people in a way that really is very tragic, Melissa. No workforce training. We need to train people for the jobs of the future. We can't get anything passed through Congress because of sequester and the Tea Party. And so we've got a major issue that we have to deal with. And the president, I think, is right by going out into the country talking about it.
And this is so real, Congressman. Mark, I want to show you this from McDonald's. This is McDonald's budget for how to live on your income as a McDonald's worker. Might be just a tad hard to see there, but basically they're saying, here's your income from your first job. This is what you expected. Here's your income from your second job. I'm not kidding. Their assumption is that you will work a second job. Then they start showing what you will save, what your mortgage will be, your rent. They also put in, a whole lovely $20 for your health insurance. And by the way, this entire budget includes, for example, no food, which it seems to me goes back to your point that part of what they're assuming is that the social safety net is going to pick up and subsidize their profits, when even the fast food industry themselves are saying, you can't make it off of one job with us. How far down the rabbit hole have we gone in terms of our inability to come back as an economy?
Well, as someone whose first job was at Burger King rather than McDonald's, you know, I was in high school, wasn't trying to live on it, and I do think we need to keep a role for jobs that are part-time for high school students, for teenagers.
But
and so if I could finish
almost 90% of people making minimum wage. No, but almost 90% of people making minimum wage are over 20. Just keep going, but I just want to make sure that's clear.
The point is, I don't think we're going to grow high-wage jobs by eliminating low-wage jobs. I don't think we make people better off by limiting their choices. I want to expand their choices. And so ultimately, if we want to raise wages, we need to make people more productive, and that's human capital, you know, education, training. It's also removing negative capital. The worst thing you are going to be if you're in a situation is, for instance, if you've dropped out of high school and you have a criminal record. So what are we going to do about all the people that are incarcerated in this country when they come out of incarceration and try to get jobs? That's a much bigger problem we don't address. That eliminating jobs is not going to help.
This is interesting to say so I'm not sure that I've heard the argument made this way. Jared?
So I just read this morning. There's a good article in the New York Times about low-wage work this morning. 43% of low-wage workers have either some college or a college degree. I think it was 17% have a college degree. Heather mentioned all the grown-ups who are still earning the minimum wage. This is not simply a matter of being more skilled or getting more education. That helps, and all of us around this table know that. That helps and has helped us. So it's critical. But there are a lot of people who are high school graduates, people with some college, who are stuck in jobs that pay far too low for them to support their families, and it has very little to do with their skills. It has a lot to do with the fact that they lack bargaining power. The minimum wage is too low. The fact that they haven't been able to really get much support from unions. So you have to look not just at the human capital side, but also the bargaining power side, the inability of people to get their fair share of the economy's productivity growth over the last couple of decades has really grown a lot.
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, I do think I want to echo what Jared said. It is a question of power. It's a question of power at the workplace. I mean, we think about the middle-class jobs that helped build this country. They weren't sort of born good jobs. They're actually terrible jobs. They didn't require a lot of education, that were dangerous, that were hard, that were backbreaking, but they were made into good jobs because workers had bargaining power, because of structural things in the economy, but also obviously because of the presence of unions and the lack of the sort of rabid anti-union spirit among the employers. And it also has to do with power in Washington. The fact is that the vast majority of the American people, nearly 80% of the American people, think that you should not be working full-time and be in poverty. And you know what? Among the donor class that actually helps set policy, that is a minority position. 38% of the wealthy think that a minimum wage job should be enough, should pay enough to keep someone out of poverty.
And it, of course, goes back to your point, Congresswoman, about sort of the role of government and stimulation, that even if we're talking about human capital, right? So even if we take just sort of full cloth your argument, we would then still need to talk about the investment that government must make in order to provide human capital opportunities for children coming up, and that the incarceration rate is not just a given, right? It too is a result of public policy, right? Mark, thanks so much for being here. And up next, why a growing number of workers are literally paying for their paycheck. This was driving me nuts this week. When we're back.
A mind that's weak and a back that's strong. You load 16 tons. What do you get?
The way your company pays you cuts your wages even lower. Employers are increasingly turning to paying their workers with prepaid debit cards instead of check or direct deposit. The cards often come with fees. Fees to check your balance, to replace a card, to transfer or withdraw money, or to make a purchase. In other words, with some of these cards, you must pay in order to get the money you earned at your job. Here's an example of fees on a card issued by NetSpend, the largest issuer of payroll cards in the country. $1 per purchase, $2 per purchase if you enter your PIN, $2.50 to withdraw from an ATM, $1.95 for an instant bank transfer, $15 for an overdraft, $5.95 if you don't use your card for 90 days. And the fees together can add up to $30 a month or more. That's more than 4 hours of work at the minimum wage. The cards aren't new, but they're being used more widely. $34 billion was loaded onto 4.6 million active payroll cards in 2012. Those numbers are expected to more than double by 2017. Employers like the cards because they are cheaper than printing checks. And banks, of course, love collecting all those fees. But employee advocates say the workers may be getting hosed. Joining the table now, Kathy Ruckelshaus, the legal co-director at the National Employment Law Project. Say what?
I mean, those fees are astonishing. I actually hadn't seen fees quite that high listed. It's not a good deal for the workers, almost ever. They're typically not given a choice if they'd rather have a paper paycheck. They're not, which means they're not getting any pay stub information. They don't know what the basis for the pay is. They don't know what was I paid on behalf of. Did I get overtime when I worked overtime? Are there any other deductions taken out of my pay? It's potentially it's hiding some more wage theft that we're seeing in the economy.
Yeah, I don't want to be overly dramatic in historical comparison, which I can sometimes be, but this does sound like the company store to me, right? When you had like these little mining communities where you got paid, or even like sharecropping, right, where you got paid, but you didn't. But then those cards, for example, could then be used back if you're getting paid at a big box store. You then can only afford to shop back at that big box store. There's a way in which this feels to me like a very old-fashioned form of employment behavior that we, as a result of labor pushing back, went away from. And the fact that this is happening, I find it deeply distressing.
Well, and it actually is like company script. Some of the companies brand the cards with their own names, and some require in-house ATMs to retrieve the money from the store. So the employers are directly getting the kickbacks in some cases. It's not a good deal for the workers, and there have been some challenges to them. McDonald's has been challenged, and it offered some more choices for the workers. Labor Ready was challenged, and they were found to be illegal because they had the in-house ATMs where
they're double and triple dipping. So, Congresswoman, I did a little more digging, and it turns out the federal government also uses these a little bit. So in some of the benefits that are paid, often to folks who are, receiving federal benefits, we also see the use of these prepaid cards. So the government agencies actually dispersed $136 billion on prepaid cards. Card issuers collected $190 million in fees. 60% of card holder fees came from the ATMs. When I found out we were doing it too, I was like, what is happening here?
And we did not fix that in financial regulatory reform. I think it's outrageous. First of all, what we are doing is institutionalizing another mechanism that's going to continue to create this structural inequality. We're creating two societies here in this country, and we're really waging this terrible war on low-income workers, which, of course, low-income workers are part of the working poor. And so here now we add these fees on top of that. These people are just barely making it. They're living on the edge. This could mean a meal or not.
Yeah, $30. Right.
And then we're cutting the safety net. You should see this bill now, this sequester bill, in terms of $20 billion cut in food stamps, cuts in Head Start. Many states won't enact the Affordable Care Act and won't allow for Medicaid expansion. So you're looking at an assault on people who are low income and people who are poor. This is just another one of those attacks. And it's very scary because we're creating a country that's going to be very divided based on class and income status.
So, Jared, let me ask you about this idea of what we're creating, because I'm going to assume that banks don't just behave in a way that is like, oh, this is a bad thing, let me be good. What incentives can we create so that banks actually provide banking services, actual banking services in low-income and minority communities? Because what I hear is, well, I need this prepaid card because otherwise I got to go to a check cashing place where it's even higher. So often it's because these banks are underserving these communities. How do you create incentives to make them serve them?
It reminds me of an idea that a number of us have kicked around. Paul Krugman's often making this point, which is, let's make banking boring again. The idea here is that where we got into trouble is when we started to allow banks, by the way, this gets back to the Volcker rule that we were talking about a minute ago, to trade their own proprietary books. That is, banks have some profitability, and so they can go out and buy derivatives and play the stock market. And that might sound all fine and dandy, except for remember that these banks are insured by us, the taxpayers. So that, to me, gives us a real entry point for the kind of oversight that the Congresswoman was talking about. As long as we're going to backstop these folks, then we have every right, I think, to regulate issues like this that are clearly unjust.
I love let's make banking boring. Like, I want that on a bumper sticker. It feels like let's move back to the It's a Wonderful Life version of banking and not the let's play.
You want to go out and play golf at 3 o'clock, be my guest. But don't tank the economy.
Yeah, while you're doing
5 and 6 and 7.
Helen McGee, thanks for being here this morning. Up next, the connection between jobs and hunger and what it really takes to put food on the table.